Thank you all for being here today. It's wonderful to see everybody. I will not be surprised if some people come in a little bit late, so let's make room for them at the appropriate times. I want to start off with a little bit of admission. I did say this to Margery a few moments ago. I've been a fangirl of Margery Kraus for nearly 40 years. When I was a baby lawyer and with a strong public policy background, in the last century, there was this new organization called APCO. It was associated with one of the premier law firms, Arnold Porter, but it wasn't practicing law. It was involved in public policy. It was public policy advocacy. It was focused on issue-based communications, things that were fascinating to me, and I didn't really understand, to be perfectly honest with you. The thing that blew me away, besides the fact that Arnold Porter and law, but not law, was that it was run by a woman. Now, we're talking the 1980s. That was shocking and thrilling. I watched APCO grow in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000, and in fact served as senior staff to a US Senator, Don Regal of Michigan, who left the firm that he'd been with to join APCO. And when I would speak to Don, he would say nothing but phenomenal things about this woman, who I already had a little bit of a crush on. So, it kind of worked out pretty well. This is our second event celebrating women who've written books. And when we learned that Margery had written a book, I just jumped at the chance and immediately wanted to share her with you and me with our book club event. I cannot be more thrilled to welcome Margery Kraus to be with us here today. And I also want to welcome Stephen, Margery's husband, who's here with us as well in the front row.
He's the hero of the book. So.
In many ways, that's true. He really is. A man well before his time. Thank you for being here, Margery. Really appreciate it.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and the Don Regal connection really takes me back because I knew Don Regal when he first went to Congress, and
But he was a hot young man, right?
he was 1978. I think. No, it was 60. It was
He
before
was
that.
68.
He was
He
68,
was there.
Yeah.
He got into fights with Nixon.
Yeah.
So it gives you a sense as to how far back that goes. Margery, I'm going to start with a little bit of bio before we get into the book. You started really young. You got married before graduating college. In fact, you went to college before graduating high school, if I understood that
I've never
correctly.
done things in kind of a normal
Exactly. I'm not saying that
so-
you're linear. The linear is not there. You had your first child, went to graduate school at night, so you were really kind of full up. Then, while you're doing all this, an opportunity comes your way for a not-for-profit, which I believe you worked at least initially, without getting paid. What was that not-for-profit, and why did you make that choice?
In hindsight, or
After all, we can all say that you were crazy, yes.
you know, when you sit and you look back, you don't realize how many things you did at one time. I'm sure every woman in this room feels that way. Like, how did we get through that? But the truth is, I graduated as a political scientist, and at that point, you know, women had very limited options: teacher, nurse, secretary, whatever. So I decided I was going to be a high school civics teacher. I had a passion for helping young people learn about government and politics, and so when I did some of that. But after I had my first child, I heard about this program getting started that involved using Washington as a classroom for high school students to learn about government and politics. And it was seductive to think about that. And when I finished at American University, I had been on the Washington semester program, so I had some idea of the impact of using, you know, having that firsthand learning that comes directly from the people in the seats of power, and being able to have access and ask questions and all of that. So I called up it was called the FlowSep Foundation. It was just getting started, and they didn't have any money. But I also looked at the program and I said, you have down here, you're going to the White House on Monday, it's closed. Like I kept saying, adding things, and they said, boy, we'd really love to have you help us and do this and get it off the ground. And it was for 5 weeks at that point. It wasn't, the 5 weeks. The students were coming, so I said, I'll tell you what, I'll do it for 5 weeks, and you don't have to pay me unless it's successful. I don't know what prompted me to do that. I don't think I ever told you that. Because 14 years later, I was still there. But, so I helped to build the foundation, and it was definitely a labor of love. Over 1 million students have been on the program, and in spite of the governance standards now that Close-Up has with term limits, I'm still on the board. So it's only 50 some years later. But every time I say, don't we have term limits? They say, yeah, but not yet. Not for you.
So you make a commitment and you really stick to it.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
While you were doing Close-Up, you did that for 14 years.
I did.
That's when you got
7 days a week.
7 days a week. How did you?
My husband just did it day and night, but I had 3 kids at the same time.
Completely understand. So you were there for a long time. What made you think, okay, maybe now it's time for me to move on from Close-Up?
So I never really thought about it that way. I believe that good opportunities never happen at convenient times, which is probably why I got married at 20 and, all of that, because good opportunities, right? And
Steve, that's about you.
so that was a compliment, Steve. In case you didn't know. But so I was, one of the things I did at Close-Up is that in 1978, C-SPAN was just getting started. And I knew Brian Lamb, and they were, we kind of helped C-SPAN, and in return for some help to C-SPAN, we used the downtime on the satellite to take Close-Up to students all over the country. So we would actually carry, now you'd say it's a webinar and it's very simple, but in 1978 this was revolutionary, that you could have a congressman in Washington and do a discussion and involve kids that were in, Minnesota or Ohio or California or Arkansas.
Crazy.
And so Arnold and Porter had a group of lawyers who were involved in more project development than practicing law. And one of the things that they did is they represented the cities in negotiating with cable franchises. And if you remember, and if you remember back that far, the cable companies were required to do local access channels.
Yes.
I know there was a lot of garbage on local access channels, so they saw what I was doing on C-SPAN and they thought that this was a great use of, potentially local access channels. You could create really quality education programs, you can engage students, you can have two-way dialogue. And so they asked if I would write a business plan to do that, and I thought, well, that's a good way for Close-Up to have an income stream. And so I did that, and actually, it was the one thing the board of Close-Up did not go along with. They were all lawyers, and they had, excuse me, but they had no imagination about this.
Lawyers.
And so the Arnold and Porter partners that took this business plan, after they had this meeting with the board of Close-Up, they said, what are you doing there? You should be here, they said, we do all these interesting projects and we're always looking for talented non-legal professionals. And if you could come and create this other company, we would be able to draw on that company to meet these projects. And so at first I said no, and then as they kept coming back, and they were like obsessed that I was going to do this. And at the end of the day, I started to think about whether any of the skills I had learned were transferable into the business sector. And it was actually quite intriguing because it was, a clean, whiteboard and create your own thing. And that is always something that's been appealing to me, is to create something from nothing. And eventually, I just decided that I would try it. Now, that's one thing, because then when I got to the law firm, which I didn't know much about these big law firms, but I went to a law firm as a non-lawyer And I have to say the partners were always very gracious to me, but when they had no system for how to treat me as a partner.
You
And-
were a bizarre animal in a law firm.
Exactly, and the people who really wanted this were great endorsers of the idea. The litigators were always very nervous about why we would be there, as you know, we're not lawyers. So I had to get a permission slip to get partner furniture. I mean, it was, you can imagine how bizarre this was. But the main thing was, when I got there was no business plan, there was no pool of money to do this from. So I just looked at it and I said, well, I'm here, I'm just gonna do it. And so that's how it started, and it started quite separate, not separately from the law firm because it was adjacent to it, but it was responsible for kind of generating its own way.
If I recall correctly, there were some issues with the Bar Association.
Yes, there were.
And again, I was watching from a distance saying, okay, so how do non-lawyers work at a law firm? They create a separate entity. And then I saw essentially some level of advocacy work at the bar to say, you guys are stuck in the past and you need to be thinking about this differently. And APCO was the result of that. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a fair assessment. It made people very nervous that you would have this entity and nobody quite knew how to govern it. And I got a lot of calls from other law firms saying, how do you do this?
How did you do that?
But the truth is that, it was a good idea, but unless you are, it's like for any business thing, unless you're totally aligned about what you want to do and about the outcomes. And the problem with a law firm like that, any big law firm, is the way they're governed is by fiefdoms, by partnerships, and really a bit of a democracy in a way that they elect a partner. And so nobody really has that sense of ownership. And so if you report, and I reported to the policy committee of the law firm, which is, think about creating a new business and having 10 independent thinkers telling you what the priorities are. So I had to, just do this to myself and really ask for forgiveness rather than permission. But after 7 years of doing that and building something, and I worked in partnership. We started to do things. There was a couple funny stories I could tell you that along the way. But after 7 years, I just knew that that if this was going to be sustainable and scalable, it couldn't be done in conjunction with another institution like that. Because even the definition of conflicts of interest and things like that, if somebody was party to a suit, who was party to a suit, who was party to suit, and you're trying to help them create a new foundation and do something, it was a conflict, which it wasn't really a conflict.
It is the problem with large law firms now, and some accounting firms are having a similar problem, just figuring out the conflict of interest. Tell me a funny story about when you were at Arnold & Porter. A wonderful law firm, wonderful people there, but it is a bit of oil and water.
It is, and I think that the difficulty was, as I said, that the people who really wanted to do this, like the people who supported us, thought we were really great for their clients. The litigators thought if we existed, we should make money, and the other people thought we should be doing this for the benefit of their clients. So you were kind of in this, in this interesting middle ground, and had to kind of sort that out. But
So in your 7 years, you basically, APCO got sold, keeping the name APCO to an advertising firm.
That's actually an interesting story, because what happened was I was asked by one of the partners to evaluate some RFPs from some communications firms. Actually, it's for the government of Turkey, and their one partner was very close to the government, and so I picked the firm, and the firm. I helped them pick the firm, and the firm was owned by Gray Advertising, and so once they got picked, the person wanted me to meet the chairman of Gray, and he became infatuated with what we were doing and said, "You belong in this place, not in that place. This is more suitable." And so they I actually negotiated this deal on both sides. So,
So talk about conflict of interest there. Let me talk to you about the seller. Now it's on the buy side.
well, it was actually like that because I had the trust of the Arnold and Porter partners, and they had agreed that we would do the spin-off because I wasn't going to stay under those conditions. But I also felt a sense of obligation that we should be fair to Arnold and Porter. They treated us very well, and I'm still very close to a lot of those partners, the ones who are still working anyway. And so Gray had a very aggressive person who was negotiating this deal. And you can imagine being the lawyer for the Arnold and Porter trying to sell something which they've never done before, and you have all the partners looking over your shoulder. So we would literally get to the table and they would say, we want this and this, and then I would say, what's really the problem here? And then I would say, do you trust me to make sure this happens right? And they would trust me, and then we would negotiate over here. So literally it was back and forth like that to get this done. But that's kind of how that happened. And it was never to buy, it was to buy out the shares that Arnold and Porter had. I, from the beginning, was involved as a principal in the
Were
firm.
you a majority controller?
No, I was never in majority control until 2004.
Got it. Okay, so how long were you with Gray?
About 12 years.
So a long time.
Yeah.
Okay. I love this.
But here's the story about that you said it, and we kept the name. Well, Gray was a $7 billion firm, and APCO at that time was about a $2 to $3 million operation. And I thought, I heard gobble, 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 right? And so I convinced Arnold and Porter that they had to put in the contract that Gray had to keep the name, because I said, for Arnold and Porter, it means when everybody says, where did APCO come from? Then we could tell the Arnold and Porter story. And so they put it in there, and so Gray could never consolidate APCO into its operations. And so we were this little appendage that they didn't pay much attention to, and we were able to operate kind of under the umbrella, but not in it. We weren't subsumed by the company.
As somebody who works in mergers and acquisitions, the story of the creation, the sale to Gray, and then of course the sale from Gray, also very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about that. I love the story in the book where they basically said they were getting ready to sell and they brought you away to tell you about the result of what that sale was going to be. Talk about that, please.
I think Steve's laughing because you can remember me screaming that night in the house. So what happened was we were part of Gray, and I had a very good relationship with the chairman, and he was the major shareholder, and at that point he was 78. So it was obvious at some point he was going to monetize, and I convinced him that we needed to spin off, and he agreed, and then he changed his mind, and then he agreed, and then he changed his mind again. And so the third time he agreed, I called a press conference to announce it. It's the theory of dynamic public embarrassment, right? And so that's what we did. And but because it's a public company, they had to hire an investment bank to value everything and then to run a process. And they hired Bear Stearns, which, never mind.
Enough said, they're not here anymore.
Yes, I know. At that point, the idea that we would last longer than Bear Stearns really would tickle me. But anyway, so Bear Stearns said, we were such a small thing. The only reason they took it on was that they wanted the big sale because they knew Gray was going to be sold. And so they sent some people, and they gave this to a pretty junior guy who was probably as arrogant as anybody I've ever met in my life.
Arrogant investment.
And I made it clear from the beginning that I planned to do a management buyout. And this is, a woman doing a management buyout, like, honey, you need more than $50. And that was exactly what the attitude was. And so, but I already had access to the money. They didn't know. And I just kind of kept quiet about it. And so we went through the process. I did my due diligence, my responsibility. I presented to all these people, and they sat in the back playing on Blackberries laughing. And then the night came when all the bids came in, and they opened the bids, and they called me at home, and they said, "This is who you're going to be working for." And I said, "I don't think so." And they kept getting louder, and I kept getting louder, and Steve was scratching his head. And I finally said to them, "Have you read my contract?" And there was this silence. And then they pulled out my contract, and it said I had to approve the buyer, which I knew all along because I would put it in there.
Working on both sides of that transaction.
It's a good lesson for everybody. First of all, never underestimate the power of being underestimated. But also, if you know what your game plan is, you have to bite your tongue a few times when these insulting things happen to you, and then just wait for your moment. And it was really a very nice moment. And so the next comment after that was, "Well, what did we tell our client?" And I said, "That's not my problem." They got fired the next day. I got called to New York to meet with the chairman, who took me to dinner and said, first he tried to convince me to do it because it was a lot of money for them. And then he threw in a few $1 million extra for me. And I was a school teacher. This is a lot of money, but I had made a commitment to my team that we were not going to do that. And I just stuck to my guns, and he said, "Okay, then I'm going to shut it down." And I said, "What does that mean? You're going to call all these clients and you're going to tell them we can't work for them?" And he burst out laughing, because that's what I guess he was told to say. And then, because we had a good relationship, he excused himself for a minute, and then he came back. I'm sure he made a phone call. And I said, "Look, Ed, you and I could do this thing in 3 weeks. Give me 3 weeks and we'll have it done and it'll be fine." And that's what we did. And I have to say that he now passed away last year, I think it was. But he did stick by that. And then right after that, Greg was sold to WPP. And so we got out by the skin of our teeth. And in fact, the deal wasn't done. And Martin Sorrell, who was the head of WPP at the time, called and threatened me that we didn't have the right to do this. And he tried. Ed was going to walk away with $500 million, and he stood by my side he honored what he had said. So, as tough as some of these stories are, all along the way there were those people that I would call my heroes, that, just through the force of their relationships and the mutual respect, we were able to work things out.
I like these, don't underestimate the power of being underestimated. I think there's probably not a woman in the room who doesn't understand the benefit of that. It's kind of, you can think whatever it is you want, but at the end of the day, you don't get to make those decisions for me. And I find that being underestimated can often be a tremendous superpower.
Oh, I think absolutely. As APCO grew, we're now 1,200 people in 35 markets across the world. Most of that was done by scratch. And starting in 1988, I walked into Russia and set up an office in Moscow when nobody was there.
Nobody.
But that's been very much a prediction of the way we have kind of operated to grow the business, of doing the non-traditional approach. And in each case, I think by being underestimated and a little bit of humility goes a long way.
Absolutely. I want to focus or turn to the book at this point. You wrote the book in 2019. 2019 to me is before the pandemic.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of books that got written during the pandemic. Why did you want to write a book?
I didn't.
Okay. Why did you write a book then?
So you'll notice there's a person listed, Phyllis Piano, who has written 2 books. And there are a lot of stories within APCO. I could sit here for hours, and they're all funny or interesting or absurd. And she said, "You've got to put those in a book." And there are client confidences. There are certain things you would just never talk about. There are things we have done that I'm really proud of that save jobs, change the world, whatever, but we won't talk about them because they're really proprietary to the client. And I didn't feel right doing that. And so she had written 2 books. So I said, you know what though? I've always had this thought of writing a book that gives women permission to celebrate and bring to work what they've learned at home. Because I think there's so much value to what you learn as a mother, as part of a family, that actually has a lot to do with how you run your business and what the culture is and how you grow. And so I said, but I don't have the time to do that. And she said, well, if you were to write a book, what would the chapters be? And so I rattled off all this stuff, and she sent me back an outline. Now, if your friend is going to go to the trouble to send you back an outline, what do you have to do? You can't not do it. So that's how the book came about. And I really had fun writing it once I got going, because it's not sequential. It's not a researched book. It's all from, experience and from your head. So if you're on an airplane, which I often am, you could do a chapter, and it stands alone as a chapter. So I just started writing these chapters, and I didn't even think about how they would fit together or anything until she came to me one day and said, if you want this published next week, next year, I need this by next week. And then I started to really think about how I'm going to put this all together. But that's how the book got done. And the title, Roots and Wings, came from the fact that as we were raising our children, we have 3 children, but we now have 9 grandchildren. And the 3 children, we had a sign on the wall that there are only 2 lasting things of value you give your children. One is roots, and the other is wings. So it's kind of, if you can have shared beliefs, then you can give people a lot of freedom. And that's kind of was our philosophy. So as I was building the business, people would say to me, how can you be in so many countries and have one culture in the firm? And I really hadn't thought about it because it was like automatic to me, but it was roots and wings. That's what did it. It was the same thing. It was like freedom in a framework. If you can have common values and shared values across the firm, then you can give people the freedom to operate and help to build something, and they'll feel very much a part of what you're doing. So that's what happened. And then I started to think, well, what else have I learned from motherhood? So each chapter is kind of a lesson from motherhood that I try to share, not because I thought, not in a way that's preachy, but I thought the experiences that you could extrapolate from those experiences, things that might help you. And I thought it would be useful as a guide, which is why it's timeless in a way. But the other thing is, I thought it also would let our own people know that as women at APCO and men, that you can celebrate the fact that you have a family. When I started working, I had a job where for a while I was pregnant, and I couldn't tell them because you could only work till you were 6 months. You couldn't work beyond that. And he was in law school, and or he was in graduate school, I guess. I mean, we needed the money, so I wasn't gonna leave work early. So, I stretched the truth a little bit, but I didn't want anybody to have to do that. I think that we learned so much from having a family that's.
One of the things that struck me in the book was that you have a life motto, and what you wrote was, think big and have passion. Tell me about that.
Yeah, because that's me. I mean, I always try to think about, sometimes I think about things that you just never think could really happen, but I think, there's also a chapter in the book that says, this is from my mother, where there's a will, there's a way. And
What mother used to say.
yeah, my mother was first generation. I mean, I'm first generation, so my mother definitely needed that as a guidance for herself as she came as an immigrant. But I just always felt that way. So, I just feel like, I always say that my company, passion is our secret sauce. And that if you don't have big aspirations, you have to have the passion to make those aspirations happen. And so it's always been something that has come natural to me. I do the things that I'm most passionate about, And I'm really passionate about this company. I think that we've managed to collect some of the greatest people in the world. Not because they're all the smartest people in the world, although they're pretty damn smart, but they're also nice. And I probably shouldn't say it out loud, but when I started, I said, I'm only going to surround myself with the smartest people I can find and no assholes.
Oh, that's funny.
Because it could spoil the lot, right? That you want people that you want to be with and that, you're going to learn from. And you don't want people who are going to be disruptive or who are going to be so concerned about themselves that they're not team players. And it really created a culture that's very lasting and where we have people that have come to work there and retired from there. And, it's not unusual. I think the average age for our senior management team is probably tenure of between 14 and 20 years, in that range.
Wow.
Our two most senior people have been together 30 years, and they're only in their 50s.
Okay. Now, you said that there were basically a three-part pledge you made to yourself when you started the company. One was, I only want to work with really smart people who have good values, who know what they're doing, who like working with other people. Another was, you didn't care how big the business was going to be. Talk about that one. Is that surprising? In business, we always think about growth. We've got to be growing. And you're starting off by saying, I don't care how big it is.
Yeah, because I just wanted to be big enough that we could do interesting things and that we could serve our clients. And I had no idea what that meant, because as you go to a different place or a new place, what is the right size for the market or whatever? And I didn't want to be driven by these false things like, okay, we have to be 200 people by then and 400 people by then. And, I just wanted it to be organic, I guess, to the business. How big do we need to be to do a really good job? What are we missing? How do we add things that integrate into what we're doing? There are two things that drove this business from the very beginning, and they haven't changed. One is to provide a very integrated service. And this always surprised me, and it's maybe because I didn't come from this industry, whatever it is. But when I started that, it was like a common sense approach to solve problems or create opportunities. So it meant, at that time there were lobbying firms, there were PR firms, there were grassroots firms, there were, media firms, whatever.
Everybody had their own sector.
Right. And how can you, if you're the client, you have to manage all those relationships, you have to integrate all those services. It didn't make sense to me that you couldn't have a vision or a plan and then figure out what tactics are important, because people only do what they sell. And so from the very beginning, I wanted a very integrated offer. So we would have people with such diverse backgrounds and really experiences, and you'd get them to the table and you'd try to solve a problem, and everybody had their perspective. So you knew what you agreed on at the end was going to be the very best for the client, just because we weren't limited by it has to, we have to make this profit, but this kind of service doing this kind of thing. It was like, if we do a good job and we're able to aggregate these services, we're going to grow and we're going to be appreciated and we'll be sticky with the client. We'll be good partners. So one thing was to have this very integrated service, and I can talk more about that. And the second thing was a concept that from the beginning, I said we're going to be global. And everybody kind of, the typo, they say, no, you spelled it wrong. No, I said, no, I didn't. This is a concept. It's not a spelling error. So global, because as we went around the world, there are people in markets that are very much
I
nationalistic.
just want to stop. Local, Glocal.
Local.
So local and global combined.
Right.
All right, got it.
Because, and in each of these markets, there are people who really know their markets, but they also have to have a vision that extends beyond the market. They have to know and respect the fact that we do live in a global world, which right now is being challenged a bit, but I won't.
We'll do that without microphones.
But, so the idea of being global from the very beginning was really important. How do we find the best people around the world that share our values, that we could put in a room and they would be able to work in a harmonious way from place to place.
Well, wait a minute, let me go back. The company got started in '84.
Correct.
And you said that you opened up a Russia office in '88?
Yes.
So literally 4 years after beginning the company, you went into Gorbachev's, Soviet Union at the time.
Yes, it was the Soviet Union.
And you opened an office with a company that was 4 years old, associated with a law firm. It was a pretty straight-laced, firm.
It was.
How did the discussion go about, I want to go to the Soviet Union?
So there's a bit of a backstory, but yes, the front story was definitely challenging, to say the least. But Arnold and Porter had a contract with the Gorbachev government through their joint venture practice to rewrite the joint venture laws of Russia to make it easier to attract foreign investment. That was their mandate, and that's what they were doing. And so people kept coming in saying, could you help us enter the market? And we said, oh no, we don't, we're lawyers, we don't do that. And I said, here I am. And I figured nobody had done that, nobody, right?
How can I do it wrong if nobody knows how to do it
Well,
wrong?
also, I'll learn. I mean, and I went, and a lot of the people who became the oligarchs were some of the first people that I dealt with, and they were selling computers out of the trunks of their car at the time. So I rode a wave that was quite interesting and actually probably life-changing, because I met these people when they were on their way up. And so I was their link for a while to the West to even understand how to do business. And if you want funny stories, I mean, they come to shoot their annual report in black shirts, and I said, no, you can't do that, And these are people now worth a lot of money that you're telling, don't do that, don't eat that thing with your knife, I mean, just, and we just became, friends, and they trusted the advice we gave, and I learned a lot from that experience that just really helped shape the company. I learned a lot about emerging markets, which is why we've always done well in these markets over time, because we know markets in transition need certain things, and you need to operate a certain way to be successful. And so we went to China. We, right away we were on a trajectory that was different than the other firms in the market. So yeah, so it was a risk. I didn't know better because I never ran a business before. I just went and did it. And then this is the not too long after we did this, there was a front page business story in the New York Times featuring APCO. If you can believe this, we're like this little company because of what we're doing in Russia. It was like so novel that they put in the front page of the business section. Arnold and Porter had never been on the front page of the business section. And so now I'm like...
All firms try and stay away from the front page.
So now it's like, whoa, slow down. And so it was quite funny. But the funniest part of that story is my brother at the time was at AT&T, and he was in charge of Eastern Europe, Eastern Europe, and now the Russian market. And his boss comes in with the front page of the New York Times and says, you should talk to these people.
That's really
I got a really good chuckle out of that, my little brother.
That's going to be very nice over a Thanksgiving meal. Come
was-
talk to me.
It was really.
Did you keep the office in the Soviet Union through its transition
Yeah.
into Russia?
Yeah.
So it's been a continuous presence there since the late 1980s,
Until sanctions.
until sanctions.
Yeah. And even with the sanctions, we still have our license to operate. We do have real estate. It's shuttered. But the people aren't shuttered. And we moved the manager to Dubai for the time being, and she's working there. And the reason for this is not to try to avoid anything, but we had a lot of clients that had problems exiting the market, trying to figure out how they get their money out, or what they can do, or how they negotiate, or all of that. You can't just leave them. So we've been offering advice and counsel from a phone.
Going back to the book for a moment, fascinating stories. We hear a huge amount about work-life balance, and it almost feels generational. You know, the baby boomers have one view of work-life balance, and then Gen Z has a very different view, et cetera. For some people, it means not working more hours. For some people, it means making a clear separation between their work and their life. You have a very different take on that. You talk more about blending work and personal. Talk about that, please.
Now, I don't think there's work-life balance, and I'd ask, does anybody here think there's work-life balance? I'll bet you do not.
Only
As you know, you don't, with you expected your third child. So, I believe in work-life integration, and I think you can do that in so many different ways. And so, you know, I just found ways to, and I started doing this at Close-Up even before. We used to have a Friday night thing, and I would bring my oldest daughter, who was probably about 6 at the time, and she would actually take the microphone from me and stand on a chair and take over the whole thing. But, you
So
know.
confidence runs in the family.
I learned it from her. You know, I think that part of it was I wanted my children to understand I wasn't leaving home because if I was going to be away, that it was not because I didn't want to be with them. And so I started to think about how to include them, and my husband was always very supportive of this, so they could actually see what I did. And I remember, this was still at Close-Up, that you know, we could talk about the 10-year-old trips. It started with my own children. I took my son on a trip to Denver, and he was in the auditorium and I was giving a talk. And at the end of it, he stood up and he started applauding and cheering. It was so cute, but you know, it was pride. And I think that, you know, you want your children to appreciate what you do. And so I think the work-life integration, I couldn't have done this without my family being my support team. And it also taught my kids to do things at home. And I remember, as much as they might have groused about it when they went to college, they would come home and they would say, you know, these kids don't even know how to do their own laundry. You know, they would be surprised that they didn't have more life experience or experience. So at the end of the day, I mean, it's not that I didn't feel guilty, because that definitely comes with the territory. But looking back on it and seeing my children as adults with their own kids, I really think it made a difference.
One of the things I found fascinating was you said that there were 2 elements for blending your life like that. One was to have a, you know, secure and supportive spouse, very important. Second, thank you, Steve. Second is to be in the present. When you're at work, be at work. When you're at home, be at home. I think that a lot of people suffer by wherever they are, they feel they should be someplace else. How did you manage that?
Well, you know, driving home, you know, I tried to get through my head.
How long was the commute? A 3-minute commute wouldn't let you do that.
No, it's half an hour, 45 minutes maybe, sometimes more. Longer every year, Steve says. It's harder now because everybody has phones and they're addicted to their phones. But I think, you know, for me, it was like when I walked in that door, I really wanted to concentrate on what was going on. And also, just keeping commitments was part of that too. If I said I was going to do something with them or be somewhere, I would move heaven and earth to try to do it. I used to do Girl Scout meetings for my daughter on Saturday mornings because it's the only time I could do it. If I was in California, I'd take a red eye to do it. I mean, I just always felt like showing up, being there was really important because there were so many times that I wasn't there.
You traveled a lot when you were, as you were at APCO. Steve was telling me you had over 3 million miles just on one airline. And in fact, you just came back from Saudi Arabia and are leaving again on Saturday. One thing that struck me in your book was the statement, and I'm just paraphrasing, some school staff and acquaintances would even tell my kids that I was a bad mother. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
When you heard that, what would you do? What would you say to your kids? What would you say to those teachers?
Well, I didn't say much to the teachers actually, but you know, it's because I couldn't do purples or I couldn't, you know, be there for certain things, and at the infants to the kids, why it's what, because at that time there weren't a lot of working mothers. I mean, it's different now, but you can imagine. And well, I started working in 1972. So think about it. Yeah, I'm old. If you're trying to do the math, I'm going to be 80 on my next birthday. So there you go. I'll save you the trouble. It shocks me also, I must say. But yeah, so I've been working a long time. So in the beginning, yeah, I mean, it was really bad. And then, because you couldn't do certain things, somehow there was a pejorative sense to that. And people would look at us and, we'd come back from a grocery store at midnight. I mean, you just adjust your life to what you can do. And that's why communication is so important within the family, to make sure that you're all on the same page, and that, you're sharing a lot of this.
I'm going to ask one question, and then I'm going to open it up for any questions in the audience. So if you've got something, please get it ready. You talk about not whining and not talking negatively about other people. Talk about that. That's got to be really hard. You've been in political
Okay,
circles for
so
a
wait
long
a
time.
second. What did it say right after I said no whining? And I said, okay, I broke this. I said I actually did that because I whined a lot about bankers, private equity, treatment, fairness, the difficulty of being a woman going through all of this when you know there are a lot of men out there that don't have the same issues. But no resentment, right? I just feel like somebody once gave me some very good advice, because there have been times, as Steve knows, that I've been pretty upset about some of this. And somebody once told me to break off the rearview mirror, that it's the best advice you can get, because if you keep looking in that rearview mirror, it's just going to re-stimulate all those negative things that you feel. And life is really short, so why not be nice? I mean, it's so much better to do that. So I don't, I try. I break this occasionally. We all do. We all have our points, and there are some people who have been pretty horrible to me in my life, and it's hard not to feel bitter about that. But you try. And I always think, and maybe this is just being first generation, how lucky am I? I mean, really, to have the opportunity. Yes, I've worked hard, but how lucky am I to have the opportunity to have done the things I've done, and then have this unbelievably great family. I mean, we have 9 grandchildren. They're between 16 and 26. The oldest one just got married. I had the opportunity to be the officiant at the wedding. I mean, these are things in life that just matter, and that's really what matters. So if you have all of that in your life, how could you focus on all those things that just make you a bitter and negative person?
We have the choice to be grateful or not. And I think being grateful people are happy people. So I do this at all. Is there any questions from the audience? Yes, Sarah.
I have a question.
Hey,
Thank you so much for your fascinating stories and your insight as a woman leader. Today it seems as though a lot of leaders are torn when it comes to holding to their values because of the political landscape, the economical landscape. What words of advice would you give to women leaders to hold to their values, even in the face of a lot of adversity and in complex times?
I don't think it's limited to women leaders. I think that if you're a leader, you're a leader.
Right.
And I think that what the advice we've given our clients, especially around, climate stuff, DEI, the whole thing is, look, your values are your values. If you have to change how you talk about them, it doesn't mean you're less committed to them. So make it clear that your values are your values. And I'll just give you a slight example of this. Climate change. And, and there's obviously, this is not the time to be involved in sustainability and climate. We have a granddaughter just graduated Irvine in sustainability. So it's hard to find a job. But I've been working with the World Economic Forum on a subgroup, and they've done a lot of studies linking adaptation to EBITDA. And if you don't adapt to the climate situation, there are studies that show it reduces your EBITDA over time. And that if you do, that it increases, and there was anywhere from like 7% to like 20% or something.
Sustainability is good business.
So it's good for good business, it's so good for society. So instead of focusing on how important this is to be a good citizen and be good in society, for the people who don't hear that message, we said, okay, you want to lose money? There's a way to talk about some of this stuff without losing the focus and the values. And it's unfortunate that we have to think about that. But it is a matter. To me, I like to be thinking about the art of the possible, and I don't want us to lose ground. And so the first thing I said within our own company is that we're not changing any. We may change the way we talk about this and what we're now legally required not to post this or to do this, but I promise you we're not changing one thing in our values. In fact, we have people, when they come to our firm, we have, you know how people usually sign things about confidentiality and everything. We have something you have to sign, which is a pledge of inclusivity. So it's not about diversity, it's about inclusivity. So anyway.
I think there was a question on this side. Yes, two.
I wanted, first of all, thank you so much. You're very inspiring. Second issue is regarding the bad mother's opinion. So this is directed to you. Did you ever had a chance to address that, or did it come up with your children at any point? And if it did, how did you manage it? Thank you.
What'd you say to your kids? If they were hearing.
I don't think my kids ever believed I was bad.
Okay.
You were the observer
you were
to this.
teenagers who didn't think
So,
you.
oh no, they didn't think I was smart. That's different. Because I've always said, when your kids are maybe up to 13 or so, you're the smartest person in the world, and then somehow you got to be the dumbest person until they're about 25. And in one case of our kids, until maybe she was 50, but and then all of a sudden you're really smart again, and they come to you for things. But it is.
I could tell a story about that issue.
Oh, I want to hear.
I want to hear Steve.
I want to hear Steve.
The story is,
Stand up.
Good. Face the crowd.
Yeah, face us.
This is Steve.
whoa, it was a sunny afternoon and we were walking in our neighborhood. And 2 houses down from where we lived was an elderly couple. And both of them had retired, so they were home all day. And we stopped to say hello and we started talking. And I don't know how we got on the subject, but we got on the subject of Margie working and some of the comments that they had heard in the neighborhood. And they said, we've observed what's been going on because we're here all the time. And what we noticed was that the mothers who didn't work spent less time with their children than the mothers who did. They feed them in the morning, and in the summertime, they let them out to play in the yard. They don't see them again until lunchtime. Then they repeat it in the afternoon. Then they feed them dinner, and they put them to bed. And what we noticed about you was when you were home, you were all in constantly. And so that's the answer.
No, I think that the kids appreciated what we did, and we ended up, you make your choices. So when they were little, we didn't. Our friends probably thought we forgot them because we would do things with the kids on Saturday night or whatever, and then they didn't want us to do that anymore. And so, when they got older, they had their own things. But, I think we still go on vacation every year. There's 17 of us now, 18 now. our granddaughter getting married. And we go every year over Christmas where we all go together. So I think, I think that kind of answered the question. I think it brought everybody closer together, and that's why communication is so important. But one other thing we did, which is in the book and really has been such an important part of our life and the fabric of the family, is when as part of trying to help my kids understand what I did when they were 10, I took them individually on a business trip. And I did it when they a certain age so that everybody knew they'd have their turn. That's why at 10, it could be 12, it could be anything. 31 years later, I get a call from the one who just got married. She was 9 at the time, and she says to me, Grandma, I'm going to be 10 on my next birthday. And they say, well, that's what happens after you're 9, No, Grandma, it's time for my 10-year-old trip. Now, her mother had never said anything about this trip, that it meant anything or did anything. Meanwhile, her daughter knew about it and is calling me for her 10-year-old trip. And while I was recovering from this shock, she said, and I can't decide if I want to go to Russia or China, because that's where I was going at the time. And I said, your mother went to Colorado. You know what she said to me? Times have changed. That's so, but so we ended up, and we looked at each other, we said, hey, we did negotiate, we went to London. But after that, everybody picked their 10-year-old trip, and they would help each other. These cousins would help each other pick a place. At first there was a criteria and then there wasn't, but it was like they wanted to find a place that was different than everybody else went, and often a place we hadn't been. And it was just one of those things. It became part of the culture, family tradition. And those kids came back. One of them did a PowerPoint on his trip for the other cousins. I mean, seriously, they really shared this collective experience, and I wrote it up in the book, and I interviewed them for the book. The ones, this is now old, right? Because it's a number of years older, and so that Nina, you'll see in the book, gives me this whole explanation how it impacted her life, this whole thing. And her brother Elijah was 11 when I did the book. He said, give me a break, Grandma, I'm only 11. I said, what'd you get out of your 10-year-old trip? Give me a break.
Now, one of the things that I did was promise that we would have Margery APCO here at 7:30 to schedule our appointments. So I'm going to take one last question. Many. The audience.
I can see
You're right in front of me.
Speaking of travel, how are you going to spend those 3 million plus miles?
Oh, I have no problem, because my kids started a long time ago calling my assistant and finding out if I had miles to go X. And then they call me and say, Grandma or Mom at that time, could we go to blah blah for spring break? And I said, I don't know if I have the miles. Oh yeah, you have the miles.
They understood how to work the system.
So so it's not like they're sitting in a bank somewhere. They get plenty of use. I'm the collective banking.
You're the keeper of the miles.
I'm the keeper of the miles.
I'm going to keep my word, so we're going to let Margery go. But I really want to thank you. I've been so looking forward to this discussion. As I said, I'm a fan for many, many decades, and it's terrific to have you here. Thank you so much.